The day started as usual until the HOA showed up with heavy machinery. In hours, my only access road was gone, barricaded off by concrete walls. I was there in shock as Karen, the HOA president, smiled in the distance. "Rules are rules," she said, her voice full of faux politeness. Without that road, my farm was toast, no supplies, no deliveries, nothing in or out. I begged, lobbied, even threatened a lawsuit, but they didn't care. They insisted that I quit that night. When I stood on the block road, anger gave way to determination. If I could not drive over them, then I'd drive through them. A deranged, insane idea gripped me, a hidden passageway built right under their noses. It was madness. It was risky, and if caught, I'd lose everything. But I had no choice. The war against the HOA had only begun 4 years. My farm had flourished, selling fresh products to the town. The access road was my farm's lifeblood until the HOA decided it had to be different. Karen, the HOA president, had long been an annoyance to me, but this time she stepped across a boundary. She instituted a new policy. No commercial traffic via HOA land. Suddenly overnight, my farm was inaccessible. I attended meetings, fought my corner, even engaged a lawyer, but legal battles cost time and money. Two things: I hadn't cut off deliveries, declined to risk fine. My company was suffocating, and Karen knew that. Her condescending smile at every HOA meeting annoyed my blood. I had a choice: to accept defeat or think differently. Then the light bulb hit me. If I couldn't use the road up there, I'd burrow a new road underneath it. The tunnel was no longer just thought, it was survival. I worked the following few nights pacing my land, staring out at the icy, unmerciful walls that stand between me and the world. The HOA thought they'd cornered me. They hadn't counted on how far I would push it. I grabbed a pad and started sketches. The tunnel would have to start under my barn, as far away from the snooping eyes as possible, and stretch at least 300 feet under HOA ground before rising up alongside the main road. It had to be deep, rock solid, and most of all, undetectable. Digging alone was impossible. I needed someone I could trust, someone who hated the HOA as much as I did. That's when I thought of Jake, an old friend and former construction worker who'd been fined by Karen for parking his truck too close to the curb when I told him my plan. His eyes widened. "You're serious?" he whispered, dead serious. A slow smile spread across his face. "Count me in." The next obstacle was buying equipment off the radar. Getting them all at once would be too obvious, so we shopped in pieces: shovels from one store, wooden beams from another, tarps, and ventilation tubes in weeks. The hardest part was deciding on a reason for all the new equipment. I told my inquiring neighbor I was expanding the barn storage. Karen raised an eyebrow still, but she couldn't catch us once we had what we were after. We waited for the opportune moment. A storm had been forecast for the weekend, heavy enough to keep everybody indoors. It was perfect cover on the first night we started digging. The first couple feet were easy, soft ground. No roots, but the deeper we went, the harder it got. Every spade of earth we removed had to be concealed carefully. We worked in silence. The only sound was scraping of metal on earth. Every few minutes, we'd stop and listen, paranoid someone may be watching me. Hours passed. My arms burned, my back ached, but I did not quit. This was no longer about my farm anymore. This was war, and I intended to win. The first couple nights went fine. Jake and I alternated digging, and the other remained awake on watch. The storm was good cover. Thunder muffled the noise of shovels hitting the ground, and heavy rain kept nosy neighbors in. But when we dug deeper, the tougher work began. Only 3 feet down, we came to hard-packed ground, as hard as concrete. The shovels had trouble penetrating. "We need a pickaxe," Jake growled, wiping sweat from his forehead. I gritted my teeth. Another tool meant another risk. Buying one too soon after our previous resupply stop could cause suspicion, so instead I borrowed one from an old barn at the back of my farm, hoping no one would notice. It proved useful, but the further we went, the harder it became. At 5 feet, we came across our first underground rock. Too big to remove, too difficult to break. "We dig a way around it," Jake said, "or this whole project is dead." Stopping wasn't an option. We scooped a path around it, shoring the walls with wooden boards to keep the soil from caving in. Night after night, we made slow but certain progress, creeping toward freedom. Then disaster struck one night as I was bringing in loads of dirt. I heard a sound of footprints too close. I froze in the dark. I caught sight of a glow from a light beam flashlight coming in towards the barn. Somebody was there. I barely had time to vacate before the shout bellowed out. "Hello, is anybody here? Karen?" I crept behind a stack of bales of hay, racing pulse as she had noticed the mountains of soil that we were taking pains to hide, and so decided to come and see. I heard her crunching boots on pebbles coming closer if she found the hole. It was too thin. I grabbed a hammer that was handy on one of the workbenches and pounded on the barn wall. Let the sound echo in the dark, then made a circle on the other side, making sure that my footsteps echoed loudly for her sake. "Who is there?" Snapped her torch, whirling round me, stood still huddled over in shadows. A few tense moments passed. Then she probably just a raccoon, she complained before strolling away. I released my hand, shaking that was too near. When I alerted Jake the next day, he chuckled. "You truly believe a hammer was going to fool her? It worked, didn't it?" I smiled, but Karen was becoming suspicious. We had to accelerate. So we excavated more, worked more, tiredness set in. But I did not mind because we were not merely digging a tunnel anymore. We were digging under the HOA's control, and nothing was going to stop us. We had been moving steadily, too steadily, a few more nights, and we'd be past HOA-controlled ground. But just when I thought we had it all worked out, disaster struck. It started with a low groan, hardly audible. Then the tremor, before I could shift a section of the tunnel wall, fell and a cloud of dust choked the air. As wood splintered and soil rushed in. "Move back!" I yelled, catching Jake by the arm and yanking him. Toward the entrance, we hardly made it out before the whole section caved in, shutting off half of what we'd spent weeks excavating. My chest heaved as I gazed at the wreckage. Hours of work smothered. Jake coughed, shaking dirt out of his hair. "That's bad was an understatement. We had to shore up the tunnel before it happened again. But that required more wood, more materials, more risk, and we didn't have time." Karen had been loitering on, more often, her sharp eyes scanning my property. The night after the fall, I caught her standing outside my fence, arms crossed. Watching, I played it cool. Walking over casually. "Something I can help you with, Karen?" She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Funny thing, I've been hearing noises at night, digging sounds, and I noticed you've been busy lately." I moved my shoulders. "Farming's hard work." Her eyes narrowed. "You're up to something." She was getting too close. One wrong move, and she'd receive it that evening. Jake and I sat in the barn gazing at the ruined tunnel. The destruction shook me, not physically, for the first time. Uncertainty crept in. Was this insane scheme worth it? Maybe the HOA had already won. Maybe I should just take my losses before I got caught. Jake saw the doubt on my face. He leaned forward. "Look, man, we're already halfway there. We can fix the tunnel. But if we quit now, they win." He was right. Karen wanted me to lose. She wanted my farm to perish, and with her under her control, I clenched my fists. "We're ending this." The following evening, we reinforced the walls with whatever we had: more beams, heavier supports, anything to prevent it from collapsing in again. We labored faster, motivated by desperation and blind hatred. The tunnel would hold, and when it was finished, Karen and her precious HOA would even see what struck them. For weeks, we struggled against dirt, rock, fatigue, and fear. Now we were in the final stretch. A few feet separated us from freedom. Jake and I worked in quiet, our muscles searing, our hands blistered, but neither of us noticed the tunnel had held firm after shoring. And now we were level with HOA-held territory. Any error could blow the whole operation. Then another problem as we excavated closer to the point of exit. We hit something unexpected. Pipes, heavy metal, and just where we had meant to break through. If we destroyed them, the HOA would initiate an inquiry immediately. I clenched my jaw. We had gone too far to stop now. Move the point of exit. Jake suggested move several feet. It was hazardous, but it was our best option. We aligned the course, digging with caution, straining to hear any sound coming from above. Each scratch of our shovels boomed, deafening. One slip, and we were finished at last. I pressed my hands against the last thin crust of dirt between us and the open air. My heart was racing. If Karen or anyone else was nearby, we were done. I pulled a lungful of air and pushed the dirt aside. It crumbled and fell. A rush of fresh air flooded in, and for the first time in weeks I saw moonlight pouring in. I crawled out slowly, scanning around us. We had come out just behind a thick line of bushes, near the main road, completely hidden, looking around. I turned around smiling. It worked. Jake clambered up too, covered in mud but grinning. Damn right, it worked. Now was the test. I went back to my farm, loaded a small crate of fruit onto a cart, and walked straight into the tunnel. No hesitation at all, each step along that narrow underground Madrid blue tunnel was a reminder of how much we had risked. Minutes later, I came out the other end, unseen and untouched by HOA laws. Jake waiting, his arms crossed. While I smiled deliveries back on the job that night, I stood in front of the old barricaded street, looking at the cold, hard concrete Karen had put up to break me. She thought she had won. She had no clue business was back and the farm was up and running again. Deliveries got moving and out like nothing ever changed. The HOA had no clue how I was getting around their siege, and that was the best part. Karen was angry. She patrolled around seeking leads, questioning neighbors, even adding new security cameras. But she came up with nothing. One day I caught her guarding by the barricade arms, crossed frustration written all over her face. I passed her by with smiling knowledge. Something wrong, Karen? She glared at me, but she had nothing. No means to stop me. With my farm back on track, I started working on the next stage, legalizing my tunnel. I did some research, property law, zoning loopholes and rights of underground access. If the HOA was able to make changes to entrap me, I could have a way of outwitting them at their own game. After months of legal maneuverings and documentation, I finally received approval. My tunnel was now legally recognized when Karen heard about it. Her face was red with anger. She had wasted all that time searching for evidence, only to discover she could no longer stop me now. Not only was my farm thriving, but the very thing that they tried to bury me beneath was designated by law the HOA had lost, and this time they couldn't do a damn thing about.